Captain Sarah Mitchell had always been different from other girls in her small hometown of Cedar Falls, Iowa. While her classmates played with dolls, she was building model airplanes and dreaming of soaring through the clouds. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, would often find her in the garage, grease on her hands, tinkering with engines he had brought home from the local mechanic shop. "Dad, how fast do fighter jets really go?" 8-year-old Sarah asked. One evening, her eyes bright with curiosity as she looked up from a half-assembled engine. Her father smiled, remembering his own dreams of flight that were cut short by a war that took him to the jungles instead of the skies. "Fast enough to touch the stars, sweetheart. Fast enough to touch the stars." Growing up in the 1980s, Sarah faced countless obstacles. Her high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Henderson, had laughed when Sarah mentioned her dream of becoming a combat pilot. "Honey, that's a man's world. Maybe consider teaching or nursing instead," she had said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension that would fuel Sarah's determination for years to come. But Sarah's parents never doubted her. Her mother, Elena, a strong-willed woman who had worked 2 jobs to support the family, taught Sarah that limitations existed only in people's minds. "Mija," she would say in her soft Spanish accent, "this guy doesn't care if you're a boy or a girl. It only cares if you have the courage to claim it." After high school, Sarah earned a full scholarship to the Air Force Academy. The day she left Cedar Falls, the entire town seemed to gather at the bus station. Some whispered doubts, others offered encouragement. But Sarah only heard the steady beating of her own heart, and her father's final words. "Show them what Mitchell women are made of." The academy was brutal. Sarah was one of only 37 women in her class of over 1,000 cadets. The physical training pushed her body to its limits. The academic requirements challenged every fiber of her intelligence. And the social isolation nearly broke her spirit. Many nights she would lie in her narrow dormitory bed, questioning whether she had what it took. During her sophomore year, something shifted. In advanced aerodynamics class, Sarah consistently scored at the top of her class. Her instructor, Colonel James Wright, a decorated pilot himself, began to notice her exceptional understanding of flight dynamics and combat tactics. "Mitchell," he said after class one day, "you have something special. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The real test came during her first solo flight in a T-6 Texan trainer aircraft. As Sarah climbed into the cockpit, her hands trembling slightly with excitement and nerves, she thought of all the people who had told her this moment would never come. The engine roared to life, and as she taxied down the runway, she felt a connection to something larger than herself. At 3,000 feet, alone in the vast blue sky, Sarah experienced a moment of pure clarity. The earth spread below her like a patchwork quilt, and she understood that she wasn't just flying an airplane. She was living her destiny. When she landed 20 minutes later, Colonel Wright was waiting on the tarmac with an unusual expression on his face. "How did it feel up there, Cadet Mitchell?" he asked. "Like coming home, sir?" Sarah replied without hesitation. Her performance continued to excel throughout her academy years. She graduated 3rd in her class and was selected for fighter pilot training, a rare honor that only the most exceptional cadets received. The celebration in Cedar Falls lasted for days, with the local newspaper running a front-page story titled "Local Girl Breaks Barriers in the Sky." Fighter pilot training at Columbus Air Force Base in Mississippi was where Sarah truly found her calling. Flying supersonic jets required a combination of lightning-fast reflexes, tactical intelligence, and ice-cold nerves under pressure. Sarah possessed all 3 in abundance. Her instructors were amazed by her ability to remain calm during high-stress combat simulations, and her intuitive understanding of aerial warfare tactics. During one particularly challenging training exercise, Sarah's flight of 4 F-16s was tasked with intercepting enemy aircraft while avoiding surface-to-air missiles in a complex desert scenario. Within minutes of the exercise beginning, 2 of her fellow pilots had been shot down by the computerized defense systems. Sarah found herself outnumbered 4-1 against the aggressor squadron. Instead of retreating or calling for backup as the scenario suggested, Sarah executed a series of maneuvers that her instructors had never seen before. She used the desert terrain to mask her approach, flew so low that she was barely visible on radar, and systematically eliminated each enemy aircraft with precision that bordered on the supernatural. When the exercise ended, the control room was silent. Her instructor, Major Patricia Lopez, the first female combat pilot Sarah had ever trained under, approached her after debriefing with tears in her eyes. "In 15 years of training pilots, I have never seen anything like what you just did up there," Major Lopez said. "You didn't just fly that airplane, Sarah. You became one with it." Word of Sarah's exceptional abilities spread quickly through the Air Force community. She was fast-tracked to advanced combat training and earned her wings as a fully qualified fighter pilot in record time. Her first assignment was to the 388th Fighter Wing at Hill Air Force Base in Utah, where she would fly F-16 Fighting Falcons in support of various military operations. The base commander, Brigadier General Robert Hayes, was initially skeptical about having a female combat pilot in his wing. However, Sarah's reputation preceded her, and he decided to give her a chance to prove herself. What he didn't expect was that she would exceed every expectation placed upon her. Sarah's first combat mission came sooner than anyone anticipated. Tensions in the Middle East had escalated, and her squadron was deployed to provide air support for ground operations. As she suited up for her first real combat sortie, Sarah felt the weight of not just her own expectations, but those of every woman who dreamed of following in her footsteps. The mission was a success, and Sarah's performance earned her the respect of her fellow pilots and superiors alike. Over the next several years, she would fly dozens of combat missions, earn multiple commissions, and slowly climb the ranks of the Air Force hierarchy. But Sarah's most defining moment was still years away, waiting in the form of an unexpected encounter with a Navy SEAL team that would change everything she thought she knew about herself and her capabilities. Years of combat missions had transformed Sarah from an eager young pilot into a seasoned warrior. By 2003, she had been promoted to major and was serving as a squadron leader at Bram Airfield in Afghanistan. The dusty mountainous terrain of the Hindu Kush had become as familiar to her as the cornfields of Iowa, though infinitely more dangerous. The morning of September 15th started like any other in the war zone. Sarah was reviewing flight plans in the operations center when her commanding officer, Colonel David Park, approached with an unusual expression on his weathered face. Behind him walked a man she had never seen before. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a kind of quiet intensity that immediately commanded respect. "Major Mitchell," Colonel Park said, "I'd like you to meet Captain Marcus Thompson, Navy SEALs. He has a unique situation that requires our assistance." Captain Thompson stepped forward, his piercing blue eyes studying Sarah with the same intensity she had seen in fellow combat veterans. His handshake was firm, confident, and Sarah immediately sensed that this was not a man who wasted words or time. "Major, my team has been tracking a high-value target in the Tora Bora region for 3 weeks," Thompson began, his voice low and growly. "Intelligence suggests he's planning something big, potentially another major attack on coalition forces. We need air support for a raid tomorrow night, but it's not going to be a standard close air support mission." Sarah leaned forward, intrigued. In her years of combat flying, she had supported numerous special operations teams, but something in Thompson's tone suggested this mission was different. "What makes this one special, Captain?" she asked. Thompson pulled out a tablet and showed her satellite images of a compound nestled deep in a narrow valley, surrounded by towering peaks and accessible only through a treacherous mountain pass. "The target is here," he pointed to a cluster of buildings. "But the approach is a nightmare. The valley is only 200 m wide at its narrowest point with 3,000-foot walls on either side. Traditional bombing runs are impossible. Too much risk of avalanche, and the precision required is beyond what most pilots can deliver." Sarah studied the images, her tactical mind already processing the challenges. The terrain was indeed formidable, requiring the kind of precision flying that pushed both aircraft and pilot to their absolute limits. "The insertion point for my team is here," Thompson continued, indicating a small clearing about 2 kilometers from the target. "We'll need you to provide overwatch, eliminate specific targets without causing collateral damage to nearby structures, and most importantly, extract us if things go sideways." Colonel Park cleared his throat. "Captain Thompson specifically requested you for this mission, Major. Apparently, your reputation for precision strikes and low-altitude flying has reached the special operations community." Sarah felt a surge of professional pride mixed with the familiar pre-mission adrenaline. What's the timeline? Wheels up at 2,200 hours tomorrow, Thompson replied. My team will insert via helicopter at 22:30. Your job is to be our guardian angel from 15,000 feet, ready to provide precision strikes on my command. The window of opportunity is narrow. We estimate 30 minutes maximum before enemy reinforcements arrive. The next 24 hours were spent in intensive mission planning. Sarah worked closely with Thompson's team, studying every detail of the target area, weather patterns, and potential escape routes. She was impressed by the SEAL's professionalism and attention to detail. But what struck her most was how naturally Thompson included her in tactical decisions typically reserved for ground force commanders. Major, what's your assessment of using the Eastern approach vector? Thompson asked during one planning session, treating her input with the same respect he showed his own team members. Sarah appreciated his lack of condescension. Too many male officers either dismissed her opinions or overcompensated with forced deference. Thompson simply treated her as a fellow warrior, which she found both refreshing and professionally energizing. The evening before the mission, Sarah found herself in the base chapel, a small, simple building where soldiers of all faiths came to find peace before facing the unknown. She wasn't particularly religious, but the quiet space helped her focus her thoughts and prepare mentally for what lay ahead. Thompson entered the chapel about 10 minutes later, moving quietly to a pew near the back. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes before he spoke. My wife thinks I'm crazy for volunteering for these missions, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 kids at home, and here I am chasing ghosts through Afghan mountains. Sarah turned slightly to look at him. What keeps you going? Thompson was quiet for a long moment. The same thing that keeps you flying combat missions, I imagine. The knowledge that what we do here might prevent something terrible from happening back home. Sarah nodded, understanding completely. It was a burden that all combat veterans carried. The weight of responsibility for protecting people who would never know their names or appreciate their sacrifices. I've read your file, Major. Thompson continued. 63 combat missions, 0 friendly fire incidents, 18 confirmed enemy targets eliminated with precision strikes. Those numbers represent lives saved, coalition forces who went home to their families because you were watching over them. The compliment meant more to Sarah than any medal or commendation ever could. Recognition from a fellow warrior, who understood the true cost of their profession, was worth more than praise from politicians or civilians who viewed war as an abstract concept. Mission day arrived with typical Afghan weather, clear skies that would provide excellent visibility, but also make aircraft more vulnerable to ground-based threats. Sarah completed her pre-flight inspection with extra care, knowing that mechanical failure in the narrow mountain valleys could be catastrophic. As she climbed into her F-16's cockpit, Sarah felt the familiar transformation that occurred before every combat mission. The everyday concerns and distractions faded away, replaced by laser-sharp focus and heightened awareness. Her aircraft became an extension of her body, responsive to her slightest touch. The flight to the target area took 45 minutes, during which Sarah monitored radio communications between Thompson's team and Mission Control. The SEALs had inserted successfully and were making their way toward the target compound through treacherous mountain terrain. Overwatch, this is ground team. Thompson's voice crackled through her headset. We're in position and beginning final approach. Request you move to holding pattern Alpha. Sarah adjusted her flight path, positioning herself for optimal coverage of the target area, while remaining outside the range of known surface-to-air missile sites. Below her, the Hindu Kush Mountains stretched endlessly in every direction, their snow-capped peaks gleaming in the moonlight. Ground team, this is Overwatch, Sarah responded. I have eyes on target area. All appears quiet from up here. What neither Sarah nor Thompson could have anticipated was that their carefully planned mission was about to encounter complications that would test not only their professional skills, but also forge a partnership that would define both of their careers for years to come. The mission began to unravel within minutes of the SEALs reaching the target compound. Sarah watched through her night vision systems as Thompson's team moved like shadows through the rocky terrain, their thermal signatures barely visible even to her sophisticated sensors. Everything appeared to be proceeding according to plan when the first explosion lit up the valley like daylight. Overwatch, we're taking heavy fire. Thompson's voice cut through the radio static. The usual calm professionalism replaced by urgent intensity. Multiple enemy positions, more than intelligence estimated, were pinned down and need immediate close air support. Sarah's mind instantly shifted into combat mode. Through her targeting systems, she could see muzzle flashes erupting from at least 6 different positions around the compound. The SEALs were caught in a crossfire, trapped in a natural depression with limited cover and no easy escape route. "Ground team, I count 6 enemy positions," Sarah reported. Her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "But I need you to mark your exact location. The terrain makes it difficult to distinguish friendlies from hostiles on thermal." "Negative on marking our position," Thompson replied, his breathing labored. "We're too exposed. Any movement will draw more fire." This was exactly the kind of situation that separated exceptional pilots from merely good ones. Sarah needed to provide precision fire support without a clear indication of where the friendly forces were located. One mistake could eliminate the very people she was trying to save. She began a detailed analysis of the battlefield, using every sensor at her disposal to piece together the tactical situation. The enemy positions were clear enough. 6 heavy machine gun nests positioned in a rough semicircle around the area where the SEALs had taken cover. But determining the exact location of Thompson's team required a level of situational awareness that pushed her skills to their absolute limit. "Ground team, I'm going to make a low pass to get better eyes on your position," Sarah announced. "I need you to stay absolutely still for 30 seconds. Overwatch negative." Thompson's voice was sharp with concern. "You'll be flying directly over known anti-aircraft positions. It's too dangerous." Sarah was already beginning her descent. "Captain, with respect, danger assessment is my job. Stay still and let me work." She dropped her F-16 to barely 500 feet above the valley floor, flying at nearly 400 miles per hour through terrain that offered no margin for error. The mountain walls flashed past her wingtips with terrifying proximity. But Sarah's focus was entirely on her sensors and the tactical display showing enemy positions. The low-altitude pass gave her exactly what she needed. Using a combination of thermal imaging and movement analysis, she identified the small cluster of heat signatures that had to be Thompson's team, huddled behind a large boulder formation about 200 m from the main compound. "Ground team, I have your position," Sarah reported as she climbed back to a safer altitude. "Prepare for danger close fire support. I'm going to work the enemy positions from north to south." "Overwatch, you're talking about firing within 100 meters of our position," Thompson warned. "That's well within the danger zone." "Captain, I've done this 63 times before without hitting friendlies," Sarah replied with quiet confidence. "Trust me." What followed was 10 minutes of precision flying and weapons delivery that would later be studied at military mice as an example of perfect close air support. Sarah systematically eliminated each enemy position using a combination of guided missiles and cannon fire. Each strike calculated to maximize damage to the enemy while minimizing risk to the SEALs. The first target was a machine gun nest positioned on a rocky outcropping 150 m northeast of Thompson's position. Sarah approached from the west, using the natural terrain to mask her approach until the last possible moment. Her first missile struck with surgical precision, silencing the position without causing secondary explosions that might endanger the SEALs. "Target 1 eliminated," she reported, already lining up on the second position. The second and third targets required cannon fire rather than missiles due to their proximity to what appeared to be ammunition storage areas. Sarah's 20 million cannon rounds found their marks with mechanical precision, each burst lasting no more than 2 seconds, but devastating in their effectiveness. By the time she had eliminated the 5th target, the remaining enemy fighters were beginning to break and run. But Sarah's greatest challenge was yet to come. The 6th position was located in a narrow ravine that required her to fly through a gap between 2 mountain peaks with less than 50 m of clearance on either side. "Overwatch, I can see that last position from here," Thompson radioed. "You don't have to take that shot. We can handle it with grenades if necessary." Sarah studied the terrain through her targeting systems. The approach would require her to fly through the narrowest part of the valley, vulnerable to ground fire from multiple directions with barely enough room to maneuver. It was exactly the kind of high-risk, low-reward scenario that military doctrine suggested avoiding. But military doctrine didn't account for the fact that Thompson's team was low on ammunition and still had to extract from a hostile area with potential reinforcements approaching. Eliminating that final threat could mean the difference between a successful mission and a catastrophic loss of American lives. Ground team, stay down. I'm making one more run, Sarah announced, beginning her approach to the ravine. The flight through that narrow canyon remains one of the most challenging pieces of flying in modern military history. Sarah had to maintain perfect altitude control, while simultaneously targeting a specific location barely visible through the gap between towering rock walls. Her aircraft was pushed by crosswinds threatened by ground fire, and operating at the absolute edge of its performance envelope. But she made the shot. Her final missile strike eliminated the last enemy position with the same precision that had characterized the entire engagement. As she climbed out of the ravine and back to safe altitude, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of relief and professional satisfaction that followed successful combat missions. All enemy positions eliminated, ground team, she reported. Area is clear for extraction. Outstanding work, Overwatch, Thompson replied, genuine admiration evident in his voice. That was the finest display of close air support I've ever witnessed. The SEALs completed their mission objectives, capturing valuable intelligence and eliminating their high-value target. More importantly, all team members extracted safely thanks to Sarah's precision fire support. But the true test of what she had accomplished that night would come 3 hours later when Thompson's helicopter touched down at Bagram Airfield, and she had the opportunity to see the faces of the men whose lives she had protected through skill, courage, and an unwavering commitment to excellence under pressure. The debriefing room at Bagram Airfield felt different that morning. Sarah had attended hundreds of post-M mission briefings throughout her career, but the atmosphere surrounding this one carried an unusual weight of significance. Present were not only the standard Air Force personnel, but also Captain Thompson's entire SEAL team, along with several senior officers whose attendance suggested this mission had attracted attention at the highest levels. Sarah entered the room to find Thompson already there, his combat gear replaced by clean fatigues, but his face still bearing the dirt and exhaustion of the night's operation. When he saw her, he stood immediately, a gesture of respect that didn't go unnoticed by anyone in the room. Gentlemen, Thompson began, addressing the assembled group, I want you to meet the pilot who saved our lives last night. Major Sarah Mitchell provided the most precise and professional close air support I have encountered in 15 years of special operations. The SEAL team members, hardened warriors who rarely showed emotion, looked at Sarah with expressions of genuine respect and gratitude. These were men who understood better than most the difference between competent military performance and the kind of exceptional skill that meant the difference between life and death. Colonel Park took charge of the formal debriefing, walking through each phase of the mission with methodical precision. But what made this session unusual was Thompson's detailed commentary on Sarah's performance, delivered with the kind of technical expertise that only someone who had been on the receiving end of her protection could provide. At 2,247 hours, when we came under fire from multiple positions, Major Mitchell's initial assessment was not only accurate, but delivered within 30 seconds of contact. Thompson reported her decision to conduct a low-altitude reconnaissance pass despite significant risk to her own aircraft provided the situational awareness necessary for effective fire support. Sarah listened as Thompson continued his detailed account, surprised by how precisely he had observed and analyzed her actions while simultaneously fighting for his life on the ground. His description of her canyon approach to eliminate the final enemy position was so accurate and technical that it could have been written by her own squadron's tactical officers. The final missile strike required Major Mitchell to fly through a gap barely wider than her aircraft's wingspan, while under fire at night in mountainous terrain that offers no forgiveness for error. Thompson concluded it was a display of piloting skill and tactical judgment that I believe represents the absolute pinnacle of military aviation. When the formal debriefing concluded, Thompson approached Sarah privately. His usual professional demeanor had given way to something more personal, the kind of connection that forms between warriors who have shared life and death experiences. Major, I need you to understand something, he said quietly. In my career, I've worked with pilots from every branch of the military. Some were competent, some were good, a few were exceptional. What you did last night was beyond exceptional. It was artistry. Sarah felt a flush of pride that went deeper than professional recognition. Thompson's words carried the weight of someone who understood exactly what she had accomplished and what it had cost in terms of skill, courage, and split-second decision-making. Over the following weeks, word of the mission spread through the special operations community. With the kind of speed that accompanies legendary military performances, Sarah found herself receiving requests for air support from SEAL teams, Delta Force units, and other elite military organizations that had heard about her capabilities. More significantly, she began to notice a change in how her fellow Air Force officers treated her. The subtle condescension that had occasionally surfaced throughout her career. The suggestion that her success was somehow due to novelty rather than competence disappeared entirely. She was no longer viewed as an exceptional female pilot, but simply as an exceptional pilot. The transformation was perhaps most evident in her interactions with younger officers, particularly the few women who were beginning to enter combat aviation roles. During a squadron meeting 3 weeks after the Thompson mission, a young lieutenant named Rebecca Torres approached Sarah with obvious nervousness. "Ma'am, I heard about what you did with the SEAL team," Torres said hesitantly. "I'm scheduled to deploy next month, and I was wondering, could you give me some advice about working with special operations units?" Sarah looked at the young woman and saw herself 15 years earlier. Talented, determined, but still uncertain about her place in a profession dominated by men. The advice she gave Torres came from hard-won experience and the confidence that only comes from proving oneself repeatedly under the most demanding circumstances. "Lieutenant, here's what you need to understand," Sarah said. "Special operations forces don't care about your gender, your background, or anything else except your ability to accomplish the mission. If you can deliver precision fire support when their lives depend on it, they'll respect you. If you can't, they won't. It's that simple." Torres nodded earnestly, absorbing every word. "How do you maintain that level of precision under pressure?" "Ma'am, training," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Train until the difficult becomes routine, and the routine becomes instinctive. When you're flying through a canyon at 400 miles per hour with people shooting at you, you don't have time to think about procedures. They have to be so ingrained that they happen automatically." But Sarah's most significant professional evolution came through her growing relationship with Thompson's SEAL team. What had begun as a single mission evolved into an ongoing partnership that would define the remainder of her deployment. Thompson began specifically requesting her for his team's most challenging operations, and Sarah found herself becoming something unprecedented in military history, on a dedicated air support pilot for a special operations unit. Their second mission together took place 6 weeks later in the Ar Mountains near the Pakistani border. Intelligence had identified a terrorist training camp that was planning attacks on coalition forces throughout the region. The camp was located in terrain even more challenging than their first mission. A series of interconnected caves and bunkers built into a nearly vertical cliff face. "This is going to require a different approach," Thompson explained during mission planning. "We can't insert directly onto the target because of the terrain. Instead, we'll need to rappel from helicopters onto the cliff face and work our way into the cave system. Your job will be to prevent enemy reinforcements from reaching us and provide extraction fire support if necessary." Sarah studied the terrain maps and satellite imagery, her tactical mind already working through the challenges. The cliff face was 800 feet high with limited approach vectors and multiple defensive positions built into the rock formations. Any air support would have to be delivered with absolute precision to avoid hitting the SEAL team working in the cave system below. "What's the maximum standoff distance you need for safety?" she asked Thompson. "Minimum 200 m horizontal separation," he replied. "But the cave openings are small targets. Can you hit something that precise from that distance?" Sarah smiled with the quiet confidence that had become her trademark. "Captain, I can put a missile through a window from 200 m. Cave openings won't be a problem." The mission was scheduled for the following night. But first, Sarah wanted to conduct a daylight reconnaissance flight to familiarize herself with the terrain and identify potential complications that might not be visible in satellite imagery. As she prepared for what would become another legendary demonstration of precision flying and tactical excellence, Sarah reflected on how far she had come from that small-town girl who had dreamed of touching the stars. She was no longer just achieving her own dreams. She was expanding the realm of possibility for every woman who would follow in her footsteps. The cliff face mission proved to be even more challenging than anticipated. Sarah's daylight reconnaissance flight had revealed additional defensive positions carved into the rock that weren't visible in satellite imagery, as well as a complex network of tunnels that suggested the terrorist training camp was larger and more sophisticated than intelligence had indicated. As Thompson's team began their dangerous rappel down the 800-foot cliff face in complete darkness, Sarah maintained overwatch from 12,000 feet, her sensors constantly scanning for threats. The SEAL team looked like tiny specks against the massive rock wall, vulnerable and exposed as they descended toward the cave openings. Overwatch, we are encountering more resistance than expected. Thompson radioed 20 minutes into the operation. I count at least 12 enemy fighters, and they have heavy weapons positioned throughout the cave system. Sarah could see the muzzle flashes erupting from multiple cave openings, creating a deadly crossfire that threatened to eliminate Thompson's team before they could complete their mission. But what made this situation even more dangerous was the terrain. The SEALs were literally hanging from ropes on a vertical cliff face with no cover and limited mobility. Ground team, I need you to identify which cave opening you're targeting. Sarah replied. I can suppress the other positions, but I need to know where you're going so I don't accidentally block your route. Target cave is at the 300-foot level. Third opening from the left, Thompson reported. All other positions are hostile and cleared for engagement. What followed was perhaps the most precise demonstration of close air support ever recorded. Sarah had to deliver guided missiles and cannon fire to targets carved into a vertical rock face with friendly forces operating within 100 meters of the impact points, while flying in mountainous terrain that offered no margin for error. Her first target was a heavy machine gun position that was raking the cliff face with devastating fire. The cave opening was barely 10 feet wide, carved into solid rock 400 feet above the valley floor. Sarah approached from the east, using the natural terrain to mask her approach, and delivered a single guided missile with surgical precision. The explosion echoed through the mountains like thunder, and when the smoke cleared, the machine gun position had been eliminated without causing any structural damage to the caves where Thompson's team was operating. Beautiful shot, Overwatch, Thompson reported. Target neutralized. Moving to next position. Over the next 30 minutes, Sarah systematically eliminated 8 separate enemy positions. Each shot calculated to provide maximum suppression of hostile fire, while ensuring the safety of the SEAL team. Her performance was so precise that Thompson's team was able to complete their mission, capturing valuable intelligence and eliminating key terrorist leadership without suffering a single casualty. But the real test of their partnership came during the extraction phase. As the SEALs prepared to rappel back up the cliff face to their extraction point, enemy reinforcements began arriving from the valley floor. Sarah could see vehicle headlights approaching along the mountain road, carrying what appeared to be a significant number of additional fighters. Ground team, you have approximately 40 enemy reinforcements approaching from the south. Sarah reported. ETA to your position is 15 minutes. Overwatch, we need 20 minutes minimum to complete extraction, Thompson replied. Can you delay those reinforcements? Sarah studied the tactical situation through her sensors. The approaching convoy consisted of 6 vehicles moving along a narrow mountain road with steep cliffs on both sides. If she could create a rock slide at the right location, she could block the road and buy Thompson's team the time they needed. Ground team, I'm going to trigger a controlled avalanche to block the access road, Sarah announced. Stand by for large explosions. The technique she was about to attempt had never been tried in combat. Sarah needed to deliver multiple missiles to specific points along the cliff face above the road, creating enough structural damage to cause a landslide without bringing down the entire mountainside, which could endanger Thompson's team. On the opposite cliff, she began her attack run, at maximum altitude to gain the necessary angle for the cliff strikes. Her first missile struck a key stress point in the rock formation 200 feet above the road. The second and third missiles followed in rapid succession, each impact carefully calculated to weaken the cliff face at critical structural points. The result was spectacular. Thousands of tons of rock cascaded down the mountainside, completely blocking the narrow road, and trapping the enemy reinforcements on the far side of the landslide. The convoy was forced to retreat, unable to reach the terrorist camp or interfere with the SEAL team's extraction. Outstanding work, Overwatch, Thompson radioed as his team reached their extraction point. That avalanche just saved our lives. Sarah felt the familiar satisfaction of another successful mission, but she was beginning to realize that her partnership with Thompson's team represented something larger than individual combat operations. Together, they were pioneering new techniques for air-ground cooperation that would influence special operations tactics for years to come. Their reputation within the special operations community continued to grow. Senior military leaders began taking notice of their exceptional mission success rate and the innovative tactics they were developing. Word reached all the way to Pentagon staff officers who were tasked with improving cooperation between different branches of the military. 3 months after their first mission together, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at Bagram Airfield. General Patricia Williams, the highest-ranking woman in the Air Force and a legendary figure in military aviation, had flown in specifically to meet with her. Major Mitchell, General Williams said during their private meeting, "Your work with special operations units has attracted attention at the highest levels. We're seeing mission success rates that exceed anything in our historical records, combined with zero friendly fire incidents and minimal collateral damage. What you're doing is changing how we think about air support." Sarah felt honored by the recognition, but she was careful to credit Thompson's team as equal partners in their success. "General, I think the key has been developing a true partnership with Captain Thompson's unit. We train together, plan together, and execute missions as an integrated team rather than separate services trying to coordinate. That's exactly what we want to expand," General Williams replied. The Pentagon is developing a new program to embed Air Force pilots with special operations units on a permanent basis. We want you to be the first participant and help us establish the protocols for this new type of military partnership. The offer represented an unprecedented opportunity to shape the future of military tactics and demonstrate that excellence in combat knows no gender boundaries. Sarah accepted immediately, knowing that her decision would have implications far beyond her own career. As she prepared for this new challenge, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From a small town in Iowa to the mountains of Afghanistan, from proving herself as the only woman in her fighter pilot class to becoming a pioneer in military tactics, she had consistently exceeded everyone's expectations except her own. But her most defining moment was still approaching. The mission that would truly test everything she had learned and cement her place in military history was being planned at that very moment in a classified briefing room, where Captain Thompson was explaining to his superiors why he needed his pilot for what would become known as the most audacious special operations mission of the entire Afghan conflict. The target was nothing less than a heavily fortified compound in the Spinar Mountains where intelligence indicated the presence of multiple high-value terrorist leaders planning coordinated attacks across 3 countries. The compound was built into a natural fortress of rock and ice accessible only by air and defended by sophisticated surface-to-air missile systems that had already claimed 2 coalition aircraft. "Gentlemen," Thompson told the assembled commanders, "this mission is impossible without the right pilot. And I know exactly who that pilot needs to be." The stage was set for Sarah's ultimate test. A mission so dangerous and complex that it would require every skill she had developed, every lesson she had learned, and every ounce of courage she possessed. It would be the kind of mission that military historians would study for decades, not just for its tactical complexity, but for what it represented, about the evolution of modern warfare and the breaking of barriers that had seemed unbreakable. What Thompson didn't know as he advocated for Sarah's inclusion in the mission was that she was about to face her greatest challenge, not just as a pilot, but as a woman in a profession still struggling to accept that excellence comes in many forms. The mission briefing that would change everything was scheduled for the following morning, and it would begin with words that would echo through military history. "En combat pilots." The mission briefing took place in the secure conference room at Bagram Airfield at Oro 600 hours on a cold November morning. Present were representatives from every branch of the military involved in what had been designated Operation Thunderidge, the most complex joint special operations mission attempted since the beginning of the Afghan conflict. Sarah entered the room to find it filled with some of the most decorated combat veterans she had ever seen, assembled in one place. Navy SEALs, Army Delta Force operators, Marine Force recon specialists, and Air Force combat controllers. The absolute elite of American military special operations. She was the only woman present, a fact that didn't escape her notice or that of several others in the room. The mission commander, Navy Captain James Richardson, was a legend in special operations circles. His reputation for successfully completing impossible missions was matched only by his reputation for demanding absolute perfection from everyone under his command. Richardson was old-school military in every sense. A man who had earned his position through decades of combat leadership, but who still harbored doubts about the integration of women into frontline combat roles. Gentlemen, Richardson began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Operation Thunder Ridge represents our best opportunity to eliminate the terrorist leadership that has been coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout the region. The target is a heavily fortified compound in the Spinar Mountains, approximately 200 kilometers northeast of our current location. Richardson activated a large display screen showing satellite imagery of the target area. The compound was indeed formidable, a series of interconnected buildings and bunkers built into a natural depression surrounded by towering peaks, accessible only through a single narrow valley that was heavily defended with anti-aircraft systems. Intelligence indicates the presence of at least 12 high V-value targets, including 3 individuals on our most wanted list, Richardson continued. The compound is defended by an estimated 150 enemy fighters armed with sophisticated weapons, including surface-to-air missiles that have already proven effective against our aircraft. The tactical challenges were immediately apparent to everyone in the room. The compound's location made traditional assault approaches virtually impossible. Ground forces would have to cross miles of exposed terrain under constant observation and fire. Helicopter insertion was ruled out due to the altitude and anti-aircraft defenses. Even bombing runs would be complicated by the surrounding civilian villages and the risk of cave-ins that could trap any survivors. Richardson turned to address the assembled special operations leaders. This mission will require unprecedented coordination between air and ground forces. We need pilots who can operate in the most challenging conditions, deliver precision fire support, and adapt to rapidly changing tactical situations. Captain Thompson, who had been quiet throughout the briefing, stood up to speak. Sir, I'd like to recommend Major Sarah Mitchell for air support on this mission. She has demonstrated exceptional capabilities in previous operations with my team. A murmur went through the room. Several of the assembled officers looked surprised that Thompson was recommending a pilot they didn't recognize, and some were clearly surprised that he was recommending a woman for such a high-stakes operation. Richardson's expression remained neutral, but Sarah could sense his skepticism. Captain Thompson, this mission will push our capabilities to the absolute limit. Are you certain Major Mitchell has the necessary experience for this level of complexity? Before Thompson could respond, Richardson made a decision that would become legendary in military circles. Rather than simply accepting Thompson's recommendation or rejecting it based on his own preconceptions, he decided to put the question to the assembled group of special operations veterans. Richardson looked around the room at the hardened warriors who would be risking their lives on this mission. I'm going to ask a simple question, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. Any combat pilots in here who think they can handle the air support requirements for Operation Thunder Ridge? The room fell completely silent. Sarah felt every eye in the room turn toward her, waiting to see what she would do. She understood immediately that this was more than just a question about her qualifications. It was a test of her confidence, her courage, and her willingness to step forward when everything was on the line. For a moment that seemed to last forever, Sarah remained seated, not because she doubted her abilities, but because she understood the weight of the moment. If she stood up and claimed she could handle the mission, she would be making a commitment not just to her own reputation, but to the lives of every person in that room. If she failed, it wouldn't just be a professional setback. It would likely set back the cause of women in combat roles for years to come. But as she sat there, Sarah thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The small-town girl who had dreamed of flying. the cadet who had persevered through the academy despite constant doubt and discrimination, the young pilot who had proven herself in dozens of combat missions, the professional who had forged an unprecedented partnership with Thompson's SEAL team. More than that, she thought about all the women who would come after her, the young lieutenants like Rebecca Torres who were just beginning their military careers, the girls in high schools across America who might be inspired to pursue careers in military aviation, the daughters and granddaughters who would grow up in a world where their gender would not limit their dreams. Sarah rose quietly from her chair. The motion was deliberate, confident, and unmistakable. She didn't speak immediately. She simply stood there, allowing her presence to fill the room and her intention to be absolutely clear. Major Mitchell reporting. "Sir," she said finally, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had become her trademark. "I can handle the air support requirements for Operation Thunder Ridge." The reaction in the room was immediate and telling. Some of the assembled officers looked surprised, others impressed, and a few clearly skeptical, but Captain Thompson smiled with obvious satisfaction, and several of the SEAL team members who had worked with Sarah before nodded their approval. Richardson studied Sarah for a long moment, his experienced eyes taking in her bearing, her confidence, and the quiet determination that radiated from her. Finally, he made the decision that would change military history. "Very well, Major Mitchell," Richardson said. "You're our primary air support for Operation Thunder Ridge. Don't let us down." Sarah's response was simple and direct. "I won't, sir." What followed was the most intensive mission planning Sarah had ever experienced. Over the next 72 hours, she worked around the clock with Thompson's team and the other special operations units, developing tactics that had never been attempted before. The mission would require her to fly through mountain valleys at night, deliver precision strikes within meters of friendly forces, and provide extraction support under the most dangerous conditions imaginable. But Sarah approached the challenge with the same methodical professionalism that had characterized her entire career. She studied every detail of the terrain, practiced the required flight profiles and simulators, and coordinated with ground forces until every aspect of the mission was second nature. 3 days later, Operation Thunder Ridge was executed flawlessly. Sarah's air support was so precise and effective that the mission achieved every objective with minimal casualties and maximum impact on terrorist operations in the region. Her performance that night established her reputation as one of the finest combat pilots in military history. But more importantly, when Captain Richardson called out, "Any combat pilots?" and Sarah rose quietly to accept the challenge. She didn't just volunteer for a dangerous mission. She changed the entire trajectory of women's roles in military aviation and special operations. Years later, when military historians studied Operation Thunder Ridge, they would focus not just on its tactical success, but on the moment when Sarah Mitchell stood up in that briefing room and quietly announced that she was ready for anything the military could throw at her. It was the moment when excellence proved more powerful than prejudice, when courage overcame convention, and when a small-town girl from Iowa showed the world exactly what was possible when barriers were broken not with words, but with performance. The SEAL captain had called out his question, and Sarah had answered it in the only way that mattered, by rising quietly and proving that she belonged among the very best warriors her country had ever produced.